Hey admins, how we doing out there? I'll try to make this video short, as I always say. Got a few things to talk about since I didn't talk last week after convention. I didn't get to wear my Moose shirt during convention, so I wore it, or I'm going to be wearing it this weekend at the Jimmy Buffett show, so I figured it was appropriate for Jimmy Buffett. So I'm going to have some fun at Noblesville, up there at Deer Creek. Couple things I want to brag about first is I do appreciate that everybody did have their Moose of the Year in by the deadline. It still wasn't my deadline, but it was the one for Moose International. We get a little nervous when people wait till the last minute, but majority of everybody did a really good job, had it in plenty of time. I appreciate it. Again, that is a requirement for every lodge, and it's also a requirement for Premier Lodge Award. There was some good conversation this past week about, Moose of the Year and someone being a fellow and someone being a pilgrim, and what the differences are. It's not easy to be a fellow, and it's even more difficult to become a pilgrim. Good example that they were talking about during convention, this gets brought up a lot of times, that member that, sits at the bar and maybe helps bartenders take out trash and does a little bit around the lodge. That's a good Moose of the Year. Somebody's done a little bit more, maybe done some repairs. That doesn't necessarily mean they should be a fellow. And that also doesn't mean they should necessarily be a pilgrim. I've gotten lots of questions again about how to become a fellow and about how to become a pilgrim. First of all, let me say that the fellowship qualifiers, the minimums are out there for you to look at. I can always go over them again some other time. And then when they meet those basic requirements, there's another sheet they get that they have to hit a certain minimum number of things on that list to be considered. And even then, it doesn't necessarily mean they get it. Those usually come out October, November time. So people that are already asking me now, wait, they'll be out this fall for fellows. In order to be a pilgrim, the only way you can be nominated by a pilgrim, or get a pilgrim or be nominated, is be nominated by another pilgrim. So even I don't have control of that, because as we know, I'm only a fellow, I'm not a pilgrim yet. A couple of things I want to brag about though while we were at convention. So we had 16 lodges in the state that got Premier Lodge Awards. Auburn up there, this was their 10th time. That's not easy to do. We had several first-time qualifiers, and that's great. We even have a couple lodges that are appealing because they think that they should be able to get it, and I think they probably deserve it too, and they're appealing that next week, so we may have a couple more. One definitely has a very good chance of getting it. So that's awesome, because we haven't had 16 in a long, long time. Also, it was posted that we were the number 2 association for applications over the previous year. We were at 380 some, forgive me, I don't remember the number right now. But that's over production of what we did the year before. So we did really well, especially considering this last year was COVID. So I appreciate that. Also, a few people are talking about dues and the amount of dues, and there's some discussion on that. Some women are complaining about, having to pay the full lodge amount and a few other things, and some lodges are charging $50 and $60. That's kind of the average. Some lodges are charging as little as $40, and we have to remember that $38 of that dues goes to Moose International, with a big chunk of that helping out Moose Charities. Again, people always complain about those dues. Moose Charities does not cover the cost of their employees to run Moose Charities. Moose International does, and a big chunk of your dues help cover that. So when people complain, that's a good thing to remember. But getting back to the cost of the dues, now that lodges are getting men and women dues and that dollar amount over 38, maybe some of those lodges that are paying 60, maybe they should consider coming down a little bit. It's just a thought, but now you're getting possibly twice as many dues, so you don't necessarily have to have that as an income. I know some lodges heavily rely on those, and I understand. But now you have more coming in. When you're considering your dues rate, though, a couple of things you do want to think about is that when you're collecting dues in that amount, again, 38 goes to Moose International, you're going to have to pay $2 to $2.25 to the Indiana Moose Association for that per capita. So there you're at $40 already. And then, if your lodge does a newsletter, I think that kind of process should be thought into that amount, because all your members should be getting a newsletter, especially if your lodge, I know some lodges were doing a little bit different, where the chapter either covered for the chapter's newsletters or were splitting the cost. Well, now they're all part of the lodge now. So again, if you're only taking in a small amount on dues, just barely over 40, you may want to take that into consideration also. Moose International, again, of course, they said last year they were going to freeze the dues rate for a couple of years, but at some point, I'm sure they will go up another probably $2. Usually they jump 2 or 4 at the same time, so you may want to consider that if you're thinking about ever going up. Although I don't think right now there's any need for any lodges to consider an increase in their dues. Also along that line, I'm getting a lot of questions about paying dues and them getting lost and things like that. Again, your lodge, or your membership, should be getting a letter that looks very much like this a couple of months before their dues are up, and they can pay them. And there's a couple of things we're having problems with that. We do have married couples that are sending in their dues together, which seems convenient and on one check, but the problem is this is what they call a coupon inside, and it has that member's information on it, their MID number and everything. And if they're sending that in with one check and 2 coupons, the processing center, there's a processing center this goes to. It doesn't go to the campus at Moose International, and they're processing these. And what they're doing is they're taking the top one, and it may even be automated. I'm not really sure how they process them. But they're taking the top copy and the check, and then they're giving that person their coupon that's on top 2 years of dues, and then the spouse that was on the second sheet is not getting anything at all, and then they don't know why their dues have expired because they said, I sent a check in, we paid for both. Well, that's what's happening. We need to make sure they get sent in different envelopes with different checks so they're getting processed properly. Of course, we always encourage people to go online and pay their dues also, and or this way, as versus to going in the lodge. But if they go in the lodge, that's perfectly fine. But what we also need to do there is we need to make sure that our officers and our bartenders are asking the proper questions when someone comes in to pay their dues. And the first thing is what the dues rate is they should know, and or are they a member of a chapter or a member of Moose Legion. And if they are, they need to know the price for that to charge them correctly and make sure they're paying both dues. We have a lot of people coming in to pay their dues. Let's say the lodge dues is $50. They're paying that $50. The member didn't think about being a Moose Legionnaire. The bartender didn't ask. They take that money. Maybe even the administrator doesn't catch it, and he's only paying their lodge dues and not their Moose Legion dues. And then they're expiring, and that member's wondering, well, why a year later, I'm not a Moose Legionnaire. Well, yes, I am. I mean, I went through conferral a couple of years ago. So that's also an issue we have to consider when we're talking about dues. Also, I've had some people ask about lifetime membership still. This still seems to be a little bit of a confusion. The member cannot pay for that at the lodge. They do have to pay that directly to Moose International, but they're not sending that payment to Moose International. They're sending it to the dues processing center. And if they got their dues letter, the address is on there. And of course, I can always get it for somebody else. And that is the P.O. Box, Dues Processing Center, Moose International, P.O. Box 88065, but there's an address on there. They need to send it to that. And on there, they need to include their MID number, and they need to include that it's for a lifetime membership. So, again, I know people like to throw this mail away. Try to encourage them to write to look at their mail, and I know that sometimes Moose sends quite a bit of stuff out, but when it's important, it's got the orange tag on it. I mean, it says personal and confidential. I mean, it stands out a little bit. They should be looking for that. Plus, they know when their dues are coming up, and if they're pay their dues and they're waiting for their card to come in, they should be looking diligently for that also, because people seem to throw that mail away and then not get their membership card, then blame the lodge for not getting it. And along that lines also, we have a lot of people saying they're not getting their cards, and that's because they've moved somewhere and not updated their information at the lodge. It's a good idea every once in a while to put something in a newsletter to remind people to ask for current phone numbers, because I talked to somebody recently and the phone number that they had, I had to actually track the person down. The phone number that was in Moose International was more than 20 years old. He hadn't had that number in a long, long time. So just a couple of things to consider. Also, when it comes to applications right now, we know there's no fee for applications until July 31st. Of course, there will never be an application fee again for Moose Legion or for chapter members. But for the lodge, after the 31st, there will be. The 31st of July is a Sunday. You cannot put them in after that date and expect the lodge not to get charged that application fee. So, on that Friday or Saturday, you need to go into the lodge. You need to see if any applications have been turned in, because if you get one on Saturday and you put it in on Monday, the lodge is going to get charged that application fee. And don't go back to that member or that potential new member and try to charge them for it, because it wasn't their fault. They gave it to you guys on Saturday. So just keep an eye on that also. This videos went over 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep them shorter than that. I got some more things to talk about next time though. But for now, you guys have a good evening and have a good week, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.